The moment the sealed DNA results arrived at Kensington Palace, whispers turned into roars. What could possibly shatter Prince William's world so completely that even the heir to the throne broke down in uncontrollable tears? The envelope itself seemed to carry the weight of history, a silent reminder that the ghosts of the past never rest quietly. For years, the palace had worked tirelessly to silence speculation, to bury rumors beneath layers of ceremony and duty. Yet here it was, a small, unassuming package capable of detonating the entire foundation of the monarchy. William held it in his hands longer than anyone expected, the hesitation itself telling a story. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was the culmination of decades of suspicion. Whispers carried through corridors and questions that had haunted him since childhood. His heart pounded as memories of his mother flooded back her laughter, her pain, her warnings that the crown was never as it seemed. Every rumor, every quiet suggestion that Diana had carried a truth too dangerous to reveal now rested in his trembling. Grasped the palace had long been a theater of control, where silence was mistaken for peace. But within those gilded halls, whispers never truly died. Rumors about Diana's hidden truth had survived her death, morphing into a shadowy narrative that even the palace couldn't extinguish. And though William had grown accustomed to the speculation, this was different. This was proof. The possibility that the very core of his identity was not what he had been told made the silence around him unbearable. The envelope, cold against his skin, became a symbol of collision, the past crashing violently into the present. For William, this was no longer about his role as heir, or even about the monarchy's survival. This was about his mother, about the woman he adored, but could never fully understand. The mother who had warned him, who had left hints that her final truth would one day come to light. In that moment, her memory seemed to rise before him, almost as though she had orchestrated this revelation from beyond. The silence in the corridors was deafening, as though the very walls of Kensington knew what was at stake. Servants avoided his gaze. Advisors shifted nervously, but no one dared to break the tension. It was William's burden alone to carry, his tears already threatening to spill before the envelope was even opened. For a man trained to embody composure, to lead with steadiness, the weight of his mother's shadow was almost too much to bear, and yet he knew. He knew this truth, once revealed, would redraw the very map of royal bloodlines forever. The monarchy was built on lineage, on blood, on the unbroken chain of succession that justified its existence. But what if that chain had already been shattered years ago? What if the secret Diana carried had been the ticking clock leading to this very moment? William's hands tightened, his chest heaving, as if the entire kingdom rested on the next few breaths. As his tears finally broke free, they were not only for himself but for her, for the truth she had been forced to carry alone, for the years he had spent in the dark, oblivious to the secret buried beneath polished crowns and carefully staged photographs. This was the collision of his future with her past, and in that intersection, everything he thought he knew began to unravel. But before the world could grasp what William had just uncovered, we must go back to the shadowed corners of Diana's life, where this secret began. What did Diana know that she dared never tell the world? And why did she leave behind clues that only now resurfaced through science? Within the grandeur of palace walls, she lived a life most would envy. Yet behind closed doors, her spirit often trembled under the crushing weight of duty and deceit. She was adored by millions. Yet in her silence, she carried a torment few could imagine. Her smiles concealed truths that could fracture the monarchy, truths she whispered only in fragments to those she trusted most. Her life was not simply a fairy tale marriage gone wrong. It was a labyrinth of secrets and survival. Diana often confided through her letters, each word laced with sorrow and unspoken warnings. There were moments where she hinted at a revelation too explosive to commit fully to paper. These writings, scattered across her private exchanges, spoke of betrayals she could not name and shadows she could not expose. Some letters carried a single chilling suggestion that William's destiny was not entirely what the crown had promised. The words stopped short of confession, but they carried enough weight to disturb those who read them, leaving unanswered questions that now echo louder than ever. Those closest to her, the confidants who stood at her side in her most fragile hours, recalled cryptic conversations that seemed to defy clarity. Diana would often speak in riddles, as if weighing every word against the possibility of discovery. She hinted that William would one day confront a truth far greater than the weight of kingship. He will need strength they cannot give him. She once said, her voice breaking, her meaning left deliberately veiled. It was as though she wanted to prepare her son for something hidden while protecting him from the devastation of knowing too soon. This final secret, the one she guarded with such fierce resolve, was a burden she carried even into her last days. Friends believed she kept it close to her chest because it was too dangerous, too destabilizing to expose. It was more than a scandal. It was survival. To reveal it while she lived would have meant open war with the monarchy. And Diana, though courageous, knew that some battles could not be fought head-on. She chose instead to veil her truth in whispers and leave behind fragments, clues scattered like breadcrumbs through the chaos of her life. The contrast between the image she projected and the truth she bore was agonizing. To the world, she was the people's princess, radiant, compassionate, strong. Yet inside the palace, she fought against isolation and betrayal. The monarchy required her silence. Her own heart demanded she keep a piece of herself hidden. That struggle between the image the world adored and the truth she feared to reveal became her greatest torment. The crown demanded perfection, but her soul carried imperfection that no crown could contain. And so, the whispers grew, carried through the cold corridors of Buckingham Palace, lingering in the ears of courtiers and staff who suspected there was more too. Diana's sorrow than anyone dared say aloud. They became murmurs of betrayal. Hushed conversations about her tears and her fears, each one shaping an unseen legacy. For years those whispers haunted the palace, a dangerous undercurrent that could never be silenced completely. Those whispers became buried with her until one quiet royal decision brought the truth clawing back to life. Why would William, so loyal, so guarded, agree to a DNA test decades after Diana's passing? The answer is as shocking as the result itself. For years he had buried the whispers, convincing himself they were nothing more than the cruel inventions of those who thrived on scandal. But then came the discovery. Documents long forgotten, buried deep in the archives of the royal household. Papers that should have remained sealed, tucked away under layers of dust and secrecy, yet suddenly placed before him. As if fate itself demanded a reckoning, their contents were fragmented, incomplete, but undeniable in what they suggested. There had been doubts surrounding his mother's truth, doubts that no one in power wanted exposed. The discovery left William shaken. He had always known the monarchy thrived in shadows. But never before had those shadows drawn so close to his very sense of self. His advisors, fully aware of the weight the documents carried, pressed him to take the step that could either silence the whispers forever or confirm them. They reminded him that the monarchy's survival rested on certainty, that his lineage was not only a private matter, but a national one. Yet for William, the throne was never the issue. What mattered was his mother honoring her memory, shielding her from the cruel distortions of history. And so, he found himself cornered between two unbearable choices: bury the whispers to preserve her legacy, or pursue the truth at the risk of losing everything. The inner conflict consumed him. Night after night, he replayed his mother's words, fragments of conversations where she had hinted at unseen betrayals. He remembered the sorrow in her eyes and wondered if she had carried this secret, knowing he would one day face it alone. To seek the truth meant dismantling his world. To leave it buried meant betraying the woman who had shaped his soul. The weight of it was too great to share, even with those closest to him. In the end, he chose silence. The decision was made away from the eyes of his father and beyond Camilla's subtle manipulations. A secret arrangement was put in motion, an operation so hidden that even those inside the palace walls remained unaware. A discreet laboratory, beyond the reach of power or influence, was selected. Trusted aides smuggled the samples under the cover of night, ensuring no trace could lead back to him. This was William's private war, his secret search for truth. No headlines, no leaks. No interference. The days that followed suffocated him. Hours stretched endlessly as he waited, suspended between fear and hope. His heart longed for the results that might silence the whispers forever, yet dread gripped him at the thought of what confirmation might bring. The closer the results loomed, the heavier his chest felt. As though he bore both the weight of his family's past and the nation's future, he avoided his father. Unable to meet his gaze, terrified that his face would betray the storm within, he avoided Camilla altogether, knowing instinctively that she must not learn of this. If the whispers proved true, she would stop at nothing to bury them again. But the dread only grew, hollowing him from the inside out. The steady air the world admired disappeared. What remained was simply a son desperate to understand his mother, yet afraid that in doing so, he might lose himself entirely. When the results finally came, a single sentence tore through his composure like lightning through glass. It was not a murky suggestion or a scientific riddle open to interpretation. It was clear, undeniable, and devastating. The bloodline, so carefully defended and glorified for centuries, stood exposed, fractured beyond repair. William, the man raised to be king, was forced to face the unthinkable. His lineage was not what the monarchy had always proclaimed. The blow struck with merciless force. For a man trained to embody composure, to keep tears hidden from public view, his restraint shattered. His face crumpled, his eyes burned, and before he could stop himself, the tears flowed freely. This was not the mourning of a boy grieving his mother, but the devastation of a man watching the foundations of his life collapse in an instant. Rage followed swiftly. He raged at the lies that had built his world, at the palace machine that had both shielded and shackled him, and at himself for believing silence equaled stability. His emotions collided, violently grief, fury, confusion, each demanding release. He wanted to scream, to run, to burn the very walls and crowns that had imprisoned him within a falsehood. Yet beneath the rage, sorrow carved a deeper wound. The question tore at him relentlessly. Had Diana known? Was this her final secret, the one she had carried in silence, too afraid or too protective to reveal? Memories crashed over him, her warnings of shadows around the crown, her eyes dark with pain, her trembling voice speaking of betrayal. Every cryptic word, every sorrow-laden letter now felt like fragments of a puzzle he was only beginning to piece together. The realization shattered him. Perhaps her ridicule, isolation, and despair had not been merely the consequence of a broken marriage, but of carrying the unbearable truth of her son's bloodline. It was not just the monarchy that had lied, it was his entire foundation. His identity, his place in history, even his understanding of his mother's suffering had all been rewritten in a single sentence. The weight crushed him, leaving his body trembling and his breath shallow, as though the truth itself sought to annihilate him. But the truth could not be buried again. What William held in his hands was more than a personal reckoning. It was the monarchy's greatest threat. If the heir's bloodline could be questioned, the very legitimacy of the crown stood in jeopardy. Betrayal had come full circle, and now William bore its cost. When he presented the results to King Charles, Buckingham Palace seemed to tremble not with history, but with fury and heartbreak. The air grew thick as father and son faced one another across the void of an unspoken war. William, his eyes swollen with tears and his voice unsteady but resolute, placed the damning truth before his father. Silence followed, suffocating, until Charles finally responded not with compassion, but with rage-tinged disbelief. The denial came swiftly. His father's face hardened, his words sharp and defensive. He declared the results impossible, accused William of being manipulated by forces eager to destabilize the monarchy. His normally measured voice cracked with anger and fear. Yet behind his denial, a chilling silence lingered, the silence of a man who recognized the truth but refused to let it live. That denial pressed down like a weight, crushing not just William, but the very institution Charles had sworn to protect. And soon, that denial erupted into something darker. Charles's outburst revealed the desperation boiling within him. He lashed out, demanding secrecy and insisting that the matter be buried immediately. His warning carried the weight of catastrophe, a scandal so destructive it could bring down the monarchy itself. These were not the words of a father protecting his son, but of a king who had spent his entire life shielding the crown from ruin, only to face the greatest threat from within his own bloodline. The monarchy, fragile under the pressure of truth, was never built to withstand such revelations, and Charles knew it. His fury was directed not only at William, but at the ghost of Diana, whose presence still haunted his reign from beyond the grave. Yet in the midst of the storm, William refused to retreat. His father's desperation only widened the rift between them. William no longer saw a man trying to protect him, but a king clinging to the throne at any cost. The tension between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to his mother's memory tore him apart. Every word Charles spoke drove him further away from the monarchy's rigid walls and closer to Diana's legacy. In that moment, William ceased to be the dutiful prince guarding tradition. He was a son, betrayed by the man who should have been his anchor. Even in her absence, Camilla's influence was unmistakable. William felt her presence in the silence surrounding his mother's truth. In the careful manipulations woven through palace politics, it was as though she had been waiting for this exact moment, ready to smother the fire before it consumed everything she had gained. The thought of Camilla benefiting from the very lies that had destroyed his mother's life was almost unbearable. When the argument ended, it brought no resolution, only more distance. William walked away not with answers, but with the crushing knowledge that the monarchy would stop at nothing to silence him. His father's denial was not merely personal, it was institutional. The crown itself had declared war on the truth, leaving William forced into the impossible role of both enemy and protector. His grief was no longer just for himself or for Diana, but for a monarchy decaying from within. If Charles trembled at exposure, it was Princess Anne who reminded William that truth cannot be buried forever. She had carried fragments of Diana's secret for years, holding them quietly, waiting for the moment they might matter. For so long, Anne had been the silent sentinel of her family, the one who avoided headlines, who never sought pity. Yet she had also been the one Diana trusted in her darkest hours. She saw her sister-in-law not as a princess, but as a fragile woman crushed under betrayal. In late-night whispers, when the palace was cloaked in silence, Diana had spoken words that burned themselves into Anne's memory. Trembling, she confessed how trapped she felt, how shadows circled her every move. These were not the careless confessions of a gossip, but desperate pleas for understanding. Among those whispered confessions came one chilling sentence Anne never forgot. One day, William will need to know. At the time, Anne had not pressed her further, knowing instinctively the danger in Diana's words. To pry too deeply could have endangered them both. Still, that promise haunted her, a prophecy she prayed would never come true. Now, as William stood shattered by the DNA results, Anne could no longer remain silent. Her voice, steady yet sorrowful, carried the burden of revelation. She told him what Diana had once shared, that there were truths too volatile to speak aloud, meant for him when the time was right. His mother's silence, and explained, was not cowardice but a shield protecting him until he was strong enough to bear it. In those moments, their bond deepened. William, who had always regarded Anne as the unyielding figure of duty, now saw her as a bridge to his mother's heart. Anne, in turn, treated him not as the heir to the throne, but as a grieving son searching for the woman who had shaped his life. She urged him not to drown in rage or sorrow, but to honor Diana's legacy by embracing the truth rather than running from it. Her words were not mere comfort. They were a lifeline, tethering him to the strength of his mother's spirit. Yet Anne's tone carried warning as well as solace. The palace machinery that had silenced Diana's pain would not hesitate to do the same to him. Power is never surrendered willingly, she reminded him, and he must prepare for resistance from his own family. Anne's foresight proved sharp. She knew the storm was already gathering. Camilla's position, her influence, her grip on Charles, and the institution itself meant she would not remain passive. If Diana's truth had become William's burden, Camilla would see it as a direct threat to everything she had fought to claim. From the moment whispers of the DNA results reached her ears, panic began to seep into her carefully constructed world. The monarchy had always been her battlefield, every step toward the throne earned through endurance and ruthless calculation. But now Diana's name, long buried under time and ceremony, was rising again. Carried on William's grief and his refusal to stay silent. To Camilla, this was no mere family drama. It was an existential threat. She wasted no time. In hushed backroom meetings, far from public view, she gathered allies and loyal courtiers. Their mission was simple, yet nearly impossible: contain the fallout before it consumed them all. The suggestion that William's lineage could be questioned was a spark capable of igniting a wildfire across the monarchy, one that could reduce her hard-won crown to ashes. Camilla's fear was not only of scandal, but of erasure. If Diana's secret proved true, Camilla's reign would forever be overshadowed by the woman she had fought to replace. Desperation drove her to dangerous measures. She began planting whispers in carefully chosen circles, hints that William's grief had clouded his judgment, that he was too emotional, too unstable to be trusted. Every tear, every visible moment of heartbreak was twisted into a weapon against him. The narrative she spun was cruel but deliberate. William, lost in the shadow of his mother, was succumbing to delusion. It was an effort not just to silence him, but to strip him of credibility before he could reveal the truth. This was Camilla at her most manipulative. She had endured the public's jeers, the scorn of history, the venom of Diana's legacy, but this was a new battlefield, one that demanded absolute control over perception. Every movement she made was calculated to steady the crown upon her head, even if it meant dismantling the reputation of the man destined to inherit it. In private, she raged at the audacity of Diana's memory still commanding loyalty, still wielding power, still haunting her at every turn. To Camilla, this was more than rivalry. It was war. Yet William was not a boy to be broken by whispers. His silence was not weakness, but strength. His refusal to yield to palace games became a quiet defiance that grew stronger each day. No manipulation, no attempt to twist his grief, could alter the truth he carried within him. And with every maneuver Camilla made, she only reminded him of the same machinery that had silenced his mother. William, scarred yet unyielding, had no intention of letting history repeat itself. The tension between them reached a breaking point, unseen but undeniable. Behind gilded doors, the monarchy fractured into factions, those desperate to protect the image of the crown at all costs, and those determined to honor the legacy of truth, no matter the price. Camilla believed her grip on power unshakable, her influence beyond question. But in her obsession with silencing Diana's ghost, she failed to notice what was rising before her, a son whose loyalty to his mother outweighed any loyalty to the institution. She underestimated the enduring power of Diana's legacy. For William was preparing to make a move that would shake the monarchy to its core. For the first time in history, the heir to the throne stood not as a prince of power, but as a grieving son, determined to defend his mother's truth. When William stepped before the public, his composure had vanished. The world, long accustomed to his steady voice and regal restraint, saw something entirely different. His eyes were heavy with sorrow, his steps unsteady, and his silence before speaking stretched long enough to make every heart tremble. The crowd had gathered to see a prince, but what they saw instead was a son carrying the unbearable weight of his mother's ghost. His voice cracked as he began to speak. At first the words barely escaped, fragile and halting, but soon they poured forth with a force no crown could contain. William did not speak as an heir-preserving tradition. He spoke as a son whose life had been shaped by deception and shadow. He admitted his grief openly, confessing that he had never fully understood the depth of his mother's suffering until the truth was finally laid bare. For a moment, he nearly broke, his voice faltering as the crowd stood in stunned silence. It was a rare glimpse of vulnerability from a man trained never to falter, and it struck the nation with unforgettable power. Then came his vow. Through tears, William promised that Diana's legacy would not be erased. Truth would not remain buried in whispers and archives. No matter the cost, he would ensure her voice was heard, her struggles remembered, and her final secret honored. It was a vow that transcended politics and resonated with everyone who had ever loved. Diana not as a royal figure, but as a woman trapped within an unforgiving institution. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The British public, long accustomed to carefully measured words, stood stunned by the rawness of his confession. His tears were not weakness. They were revelation proof that the monarchy was not a flawless machine of tradition, but a family marked by grief, betrayal, and scars. For the first time in decades, the distance between the crown and the people collapsed. William was no longer only their future king. He was their mirror, the son of Diana, the embodiment of truth breaking through walls of silence. Across Britain, the moment spread like fire. Newspapers, broadcasts, and conversations everywhere carried his words with urgency, as if history had shifted in real time. People wept not just for William, but for Diana, whose presence felt alive again through her son's anguish. The monarchy, once distant and untouchable, now stood exposed by the tears of its heir. In that moment, tradition gave way to humanity, and the crown itself seemed to tremble under the weight of honesty. Yet William's stand, as heroic and moving as it was, did not end the story. It only widened the fracture. His tears stained the monarchy's image forever, a permanent reminder that truth cannot be silenced without consequence. But within the echoes of his vow lingered a darker shadow. The revelations were not finished. Just as it seemed Diana's final secret had been revealed, another truth emerged. Hidden deep within personal archives, a sealed letter in Diana's unmistakable handwriting came to light. It carried the weight of unfinished confessions. Its discovery alone sent chills through those who found it. For if the DNA revelation had cracked the monarchy, this letter threatened to shatter it completely. Within its lines were hints of a deeper conspiracy, suggesting the truth William had uncovered was only one thread in a much larger
web of deception.
William felt the weight immediately. The test had left him broken, yet the letter reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. It was as if his mother were still speaking to him, merging him into battles she had not lived to fight. Anne's cryptic reminder echoed louder than ever. Your mother knew more than anyone realized. What had once been an ominous comfort now rang as prophecy. The people sensed it too. Speculation spread like wildfire, fueled by every whisper and rumor, creating a chaos no royal decree could contain. What began as a son's tears over a DNA test ended as a haunting reminder. Diana's secrets would not rest until the very foundations of the crown were shattered. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next